Hey everybody, welcome back to the War Woman Cabin. I'm Cami, the assistant curator here at Foxfire. It's hard to believe that this is already week 6, so I hope you all have been enjoying these videos, and we'll continue to keep these coming for the next couple of weeks, I think. So today we're going to make one of my favorite recipes to make on a wood stove. We're going to make some cornbread. A couple of weeks ago I promised to share my recipe, which also comes from the Foxfire book of Appalachian Cookery, for how to make perfect cornbread. Now, I always say that you need to make cornbread in a cast iron skillet, whether you're baking it in a wood stove or at home. However, if you do not have a cast iron skillet, don't worry, no judgment. You can also use something like a cake pan or a pie dish to make this. You just want to be really careful when you're dealing with the hot oil, because the way that I make cornbread, you start by heating up oil, so you want to make sure that you have something that has a good grip on it so you're not splashing hot oil on yourself. Before we get started, I want to talk just a little bit about cast iron. If you happen to listen to the podcast episode from season 1 where TJ and I discuss cast iron, you will know that we have a slight obsession with cast iron. I argue that if you have a couple of good pieces of cast iron, you really don't need any other pans. So I have this cast iron skillet that was passed to me from my mother, and I also have a Dutch oven. I use them all the time. And if you know how to take care of them, they're gonna last forever. A couple of essential tools that I think you need if you have a cast iron skillet are one of these really great little silicone rubber grips for the handles, because I am so bad about grabbing the hot skillet handle, especially when it's on the stove top. So I like to put this on there as a little reminder that yes, the pan is hot, and B, if I do happen to grab the skillet while it's on the stove top and move it, I'm not going to burn my hand. This is going to protect it from the heat. I don't bake with this on though. Now the other thing that I think you need, and you can maybe use some sort of spatula for this as well, but I've got this nifty little scraper, and it's got these different edges on it to fit into the different sides and corners of my cast iron pans and pots. And this scraper is pretty much essential to helping you take care of cast iron. So when you cook in cast iron, a lot of times you'll get some grit buildup. As you can see, it's dull on the bottom of my pan. So what I want to do when I'm cleaning it is go through and scrape all of that off to the best of my ability. And you can see that I did not do a very good job scraping this last time. So I've already picked up some residue, and I would continue to do this around the bottom and the sides of my pan. Then you want to go through and wipe it down with just like a paper towel or a rag. And then the best part, you want to season it. Now seasoning it is helping it build up essentially like a non-stick layer, but it also protects the metal from rust and other things. So I use bacon fat, and every time I cook bacon, I pour off the fat into this jar. It's got like its own little stratigraphy started. It's kind of hard to see because I'm down towards the bottom of my jar. But usually you can see where the layers build up from me pouring my bacon fat in here, because I don't strain it. But you can. You can also render this the same way you would render lard if you want to use this in other forms of cooking and you don't want that bacon taste or smell. You would simply just put this in some water and you would cook it down until it was pretty much white. So all of the little bits of fat and gristle that are in here would float to the top, and you would scoop those out with the water. And then you would have white lard that you could use in soap making or, like I said, in other baking or cooking projects. But I like to just take a dollop of this bacon fat and rub it into my pan until it gets a really nice shine on it. Today we're going to be using up this bacon fat to make cornbread. Cornbread is obviously a southern staple. Up here in the mountains, cornbread was eaten at almost every single meal. There are a lot of different recipes that use cornmeal and grits and things like anything made from corn, really. But the staple was just plain old cornbread. The reason so many people ate cornbread up here so often is because corn was easy to grow in the terrain up here. They didn't have the space or the climate for big wheat fields, but corn was a little bit more durable. Corn also is a shelf staple. We're talking about a time when people didn't have refrigeration, so they couldn't keep their corn fresh in the fridge. So they needed something that would dry quickly and would hold up dry. And that's what these types of corn provided for them. And then once they were dried, they would take them to the local grist mill and have them ground into meal. or grits. The main difference between grits and cornmeal is the fineness of the grind. So at our grist mill here, we actually talk about how they were able to make that change at the mill. And it's simply a raising or a lowering of the stones. And that would provide a different texture in the grind of the corn. At the time, and even up till this day, there are lots of local mills in every community where people can still take their crops to be ground into meal. These operate typically by water. Nowadays, maybe some of them are steam or electric powered, but back in the day, they would have all been water powered. And they're also stone ground, so we all recognize those huge millstones. It would take 2 of those to grind the corn into meal. Today, we're working though with store-bought cornmeal. I am actually using a combination of yellow and white cornmeal. The white cornmeal that I use is just a version of masa harina, which is what's traditionally used in like corn tortillas. I like to mix in some masa harina because it has a finer texture, but in the recipe I'll provide, I'll make sure to note online on our blog the different types of flours and cornmeals that you can substitute. If you want to make this recipe with all yellow cornmeal, go for it. You can totally do that. So before we get started making our cornbread though, I'm just going to put my bacon fat in my skillet and heat it up while the oven is preheating. So at home on your gas or electric oven, you want to preheat it to 425, 450. You want a really hot oven so that this bacon fat melts pretty quickly. So we're going to take anywhere between 2 and 4 tablespoons, so I'll leave it up to your discretion. And we're just going to plop that straight into our cast iron skillet. I like to put it in the middle. It's all going to melt and spread around anyway. So I've got a nice big glob of bacon fat in here, and I'm going to stick this in the stove while it's preheating. While that's preheating, we're going to go ahead and get started on our cornbread mix. Now, before we put in our meal, I want you to take a minute to prep your buttermilk. So this recipe calls for 2 cups of buttermilk, but if you're like me, I don't usually keep buttermilk in the fridge just because we don't go through it fast enough. So instead, you can make a really quick substitute for buttermilk by mixing vinegar and milk together. The ratio is a tablespoon of vinegar per cup of milk. So what I do is I put in that tablespoon of vinegar, and then I actually just fill it up to the cup mark. So it's a little bit less than a cup of milk. So for this, I've done 2 tablespoons of vinegar and then filled it up to the 2-cup mark. And then you want to let it sit for about 5 or 10 minutes. You want to give it a little bit of a stir. You should see it start to kind of clump up and curdle a bit. So I've got this setting here, and it's starting to coagulate a bit, and it'll be ready to go in just a minute. I'm going to start with my dry ingredients though. So as I mentioned, I had my flours already measured out. So you want a mixture of flours that gets you up to 2.5 cups. So like I said, I did a little bit of yellow cornmeal, a little bit of masa harina. Then you're going to add half a teaspoon of salt. To that, you're going to add a full tablespoon of baking powder. If you want to do baking soda, just do a teaspoon. So I'm just going to kind of stir these together so that all that gets mixed in. Okay, and then you want to make like a well in the middle of your dry ingredients. I'm going to come over here and crack 1 large egg. And huge shout out to Sharon Grice, our village weaver. You've probably all seen me carrying this towel around for the past several weeks, but Sharon works here on site and makes just the most amazing products. And this is one of my favorite towels from her, and I use it all the time. Okay, so I just beaten up this egg a little bit to break the yolk and start breaking down some of those proteins. You don't have to beat it too vigorously, but I just want it well mixed. Okay. I'm going to add this, like I said, to the center of my dry ingredients. I've made kind of a well in the middle. This was always one of my favorite things when I was baking as a kid, because that was the part that Mom would let me do, and I always kind of felt like I was sculpting a different landscape with baking. Okay, and then on top of that, we're going to go ahead and add our 2 cups of buttermilk. All right, and you just want to make sure that all gets stirred up and mixed in really well. You don't want any of those dry pockets of flour. All right, so that's all mixed in really well. If you're doing this at home, you're welcome to use your mixer or a whisk if you don't want to use a spatula. We're just going to let this hang out here for a second while I check on our stove and see how that fat is doing. All right, our fat is melted and shimmering and ready to go. So we're going to carefully dump this cornbread mixture in and just kind of spread it around a little bit so that it fills the pan. And you just want to start gently mixing in just a little bit of that fat into the cornbread mixture. Okay, and so now that this is spread out and ready to go, we're going to pop it back in the oven. And at home, you're going to want it to cook about 20 minutes. Start checking it around 18 to 20 minutes. You want the top to be the light golden brown, and the edges are going to pull away from the sides slightly, and it should have puffed up significantly. It's been about 20 or 25 minutes, so our cornbread is just about ready. So we're going to pull it out of the oven, take a peek. Oh, it smells amazing. Look at that. That's exactly the color we want. Just a little golden brown, a little darker around the edges, and really crispy. I love mixing in a little bit of that melted fat into the top of the cornbread and swirling it in because it makes these really awesome canyons or rivulets where the fat has melted into the cornbread and makes it extra crunchy. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and as always, feel free to reach out to us on social media. We're at Foxfire.org. If you're cooking from the Foxfire Book of Appalachian Cookery at home, share your results with us. We want to see what you all are doing. Or if you have suggestions of things that you want to see, feel free to reach out to us. You can get all of the recipes and additional information that I've shared today at our blog, which is www.foxfire.org/journal. Thank you, be well, and see you all next week. So good.